Hello everyone, this is a tutorial video where we're going to see how to start a song and how to develop it until we have something like a finished product. Now, due to reasons of time, we will not be doing this process in full. We will not be polishing an entire song from scratch, but we will lay out roughly what the process is like and some of the steps. Okay, so to start, so you will see that we are starting absolutely from scratch. We have absolutely nothing, no instruments, no channels configured, nothing at all. So what we're going to be doing is first lay out perhaps a beat. So you can lay out perhaps a drum pattern. You can put down a series of chords. If you have a melody in your head, you can record that. You can take this any number of ways. So you start from an idea and develop it from there. Now, let's start with something like a drum beat. So I'm going to select perhaps a kick drum that I like. First, I'm going to think about the BPM of the track. So the BPM is roughly how fast the beat is going. So in this case, we're going to do, let's say 100 BPM sounds good. And we're gonna lay out. We're gonna choose one of the kicks we like, and then we're gonna lay it down. So. I kind of like that. So I'm gonna click and drag. I'm gonna put it there in the empty sampler. Now we can do something like this. I'm going to choose a snare drum that I also like. I could use more than one and create a layered texture. So both snares playing at the same time will sound like a fuller, more complex snare drum. All right, so the combined texture of these three snare drums is going to sound like that. Okay, so I will already start adjusting the volume a little bit of these different elements. So make them a little bit quieter than the default. And I'm going to be doing this with most instruments because there is a tendency, especially with digital production, of mixing too loud. And you don't want that because there is a hard ceiling to how high you can go in terms of volume. So you want to keep it, you want to keep that under control. I'm going to leave the kick drum roughly about there. And we're going to keep that there. And we're going to add some hi-hats. Let's say something like that. I don't like that hat sound, so I'm going to change it. And so I'm going to drag this sound and lay it on top of the other one. Okay, so I like the sound of the hat, but I don't like that it's so full that it feels like it lasts a little too long. Like the sounds are a little bit too long. I want to make it snappier. So what I'm going to do is click on the name. I'm going to go to this tab. And I'm going to apply a volume envelope. So what it does is kind of like keep it under wraps, kind of like keep it tight. So something like that feels tighter already. Now, so another thing with these hats, perhaps, like and everything in this drum beat, is that it sounds too mechanical. So maybe you want to change some of that. First, the timing, some of the notes. A very basic way of doing that is by moving this slider. In newer versions, this looks like a knob, but it has the same function, which is the swing. And let's crank it up and see what it does. So like some of the notes are delayed in terms of others, so it adds a little bit of a swing, a little bit of rhythm to that. Now, I don't want this effect to be so drastic, so I'm going to cut it down to over here, something about 10%. It's still going to have this effect, but in such a subtle way that it's barely perceptible. It does, however, add a little motion to the beat. So that sounds about good. There are other ways of doing that, but moving the slider here, I think, is a very fine option. Now, the other thing is perhaps the volume of each one of these drum hits. They all sound exactly the same, so maybe we want to adjust that. So we go to the graph editor here, and let's say, for example, I do something like this. All right, so it's starting to sound something like a beat. So we're going to leave it there, and we're going to add an instrument on top of that. Let's say I want something like an organ kind of sound, like a Rhodes organ. So the way I do it is I go here to Packs, Instruments, Keyboard, Rhodes. There's already a pack over here. I just lay it down, and now I need to go to the piano. So I can do it from here. I can use the keyboard shortcut, or I can disable the step sequencer view, this one. And if I click on any of these boxes, it's going to take me to the piano roll for the corresponding instrument. I can, here in the piano roll, I can further customize, for example, like move each note individually here. I can change the velocity individually of all the notes. I can add notes in the middle. I can change the pitch, so I can do stuff like that. Okay, so in this case, we're gonna keep that there, but we're not gonna do much more with that. And well, that's in the case of drums. You can really customize that. So this is very often used in all kinds of genres. In trap, you get these like kind of like hat rolls. You do that from the piano roll, of course. So now we're going to go with this Rhodes kind of like keyboard. We're going to reset the velocity of the note. There we go. Okay. So we're going to make a chord. Let's say, for example, something like this. We're going to make a B flat minor 7th chord. It's going to look something like this. It's going to sound like this. All right, so that's going to be the first chord. Now, let's create a chord progression based on that. We're going to make a series of chords, one after the other. Now, the problem with that is if I start creating more chords, let's say, for example, this here. So now let's listen to that. Okay, now the drums don't go on. Now, the brute force way of fixing that is just to copy and paste and keep going, but you're not going to be doing that through the whole song, and that's very inefficient as well. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to take this, or these notes, we're going to take these notes from the Rhodes, and we're going to paste them into another pattern. So how did I do that? So I select here the little green rectangle, Control X. I move this to pattern number 2, or whatever pattern is free, and then I Control V, and we get this. We get the notes here in a separate pattern. Now what we can do is we go to the playlist, and now that we have the separate patterns, we can play them at the same time. Now, I don't need to keep copying and pasting over and over inside the pattern. I can just do it on the playlist. And this is how you will be arranging the overall song. Now, if I play this right now, it's just going to play what is in the pattern right here. So how do we get it to play what's in the playlist? Well, we need to change to song mode right next to the play button. All right, so that's starting to sound good. So we're going to expand that to a series of 4 chords. Let's do maybe something like that. This is a major 7th chord now. And maybe we can expand that to something like here. Okay. Or maybe we can do it the reverse. So we can do this, we can do this. Now there's kind of a big jump between these 2 chords. Like the note, there's a big jump between this note and this note. There's a big jump between this note and this note. So it's probably going to sound a little bit disjointed. So let's listen to that. So that sounds fine, especially in some styles of music. If we want kind of a smoother transition between the chords, what we can do is kind of like make all the notes kind of more on the level. So what do I mean by that? Let's say I want to take these notes. So the way I'm doing it is I'm holding Control and click and drag, kind of like sweeping over the notes. I'm going to select these notes. I'm going to move them down by 1 octave. So I'm going to go Control down on the keyboard. And it's going to move them. Now the notes are still the same basically. So A sharp is still A sharp, C is still C, G sharp is still G sharp. But the flow between the notes is going to sound a little bit more fluid. So that sounds much better to me. I'm gonna keep it like that. So let's listen to that in context. All right, that's okay so far. It's starting to sound something like a song. So these chords, they sound fine, but I want to add a little bit of rhythm to them. What I can do, again, select all the notes. I'm just going to do the same sweeping technique. And I'm going to drag from the right edge of, well, any one of these notes. This one will do. I'm going to do something like this. Actually, I can, let's undo that. Okay. Let's try again. Okay, let's try this. All right, that's fine. So we're going to select these notes if we want. I'm going to do this. Okay. So I want these notes to be longer than here, but I don't want them lasting all the way up until the next chord hits. So what am I going to do? I'm going to move them. I want to stretch them outside of the grid. So how do I do that? I hold Alt on the keyboard and click and drag. Now I can change by small amounts, and I can do the same. For example, with drum hits, and you can really get the timing right of each individual note, for example. Right? So this is what I did before with these hats here. You see that they're slightly off the grid. this one in particular, and this one. Okay. So now what do we add now? Let's say we add kind of a bass sound. Now we're running out of instruments here. There are other ways of adding instruments. So if you want to use most instruments, you will add them from here, actually. So this plus sign, and here we have kind of a menu with all the synthesizers that are installed. Maybe not all of them, but if you click on more plugins, you will find the full list of all the VSTs that you have installed. So if there are any that are not on the list, you can choose it from there. Okay, now for a bass sound, I want to go with something a little bit more electronic. Let's go with something simple. So it's sort of a 3x oscillator, and we're going to create a bass sound. So I'm going to drive everything to 0. I'm going to drive the volume of these other two channels to 0, and I'm going to have a simple saw wave. Well, that's a sine wave. I'm going to change it to the saw wave. Okay. So I'm going to go to the pattern with the chords, just so you know what the notes of the chords are. The bass needs to go together with the chords. So the bass note, or the root note of the chord, is going to be this one. The first chord, it's this one. For the second chord, when I laid the chord down, I know that the note was this one, the root note, because this one originally was up here, if you remember. So the root note of the chord is going to be here, actually. The same with this chord is going to be here, and with this chord is going to be here. Let's try putting some notes in there. We're going to be kind of like this constant pattern with the bass. I'm going to try that out. Let's see how that sounds. It's kind of loud, so we're going to drive the volume down a little bit. Okay, it's still not ideal. So I want to rein in the bass the same way I did with the hat before. I'm going to open the menu with the little gear here. I'm going to open the envelopes. I'm going to do the same thing. The volume envelope, enable. I'm going to do something like this. So that sounds much more reined in. Okay. And okay. So here we can also kind of like randomize some of the notes. We can do something like that. Okay, that sounds fine. I want the bass to be lower, however, so I can do the same thing I did before, control down. If I want to keep it like in the same line as the chords, but I want the sound to be lower, I can also change the pitch. So opening the menu here, you see range. We're going to drive that to 12, which is an octave. We're going to drive it down. Okay, now that's fine. That's okay. Let's make the bass sound a little bit thicker. Let's say we, first of all, randomize the phase. So every time a new bass note starts, the waveform is going to start at a slightly different place. And this is going to be useful when we multiply the voices of the bass. What do I mean by that? Let's go to this menu here with the monkey wrench. We're going to set the time to the delay to 0. We're going to set echoes to 1. We're going to do this. Add a little bit of feed to that. All right, that's starting to sound pretty good. Now, however, with the bass sound, there's usually a problem where you don't want the left and right sounds to be different, at least not in the sub region of the bass. So we're going to deal with that later, but for now, this is sounding pretty good. We can even do, for example, this. Echoes 2. All right, it's starting to sound a little bit thicker. So we're going to do a little bit of trickery with this filter. So let's try, for example, this knob here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add the same kind of envelope I did with the volume, but I'm going to add it to this filter here. So I'm going to give it the same shape as I did before, but now I'm going to crank up the amount here. I'm going to drive it into the decay. We're going to drive down the bass level of this one. Okay, so now it's doing basically this constantly for every single note. Okay, it's starting to sound pretty good. Now I'm going to modify the notes a little bit. It's a little bit too monotonous perhaps for a chord, so what I'm going to do is get some of the notes. I'm going to choose them randomly. So let's say, for example, well, not randomly, but whatever notes I want. For example, this. And the same places, so the same notes, for example, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. So 14, 9, 6, and 3. So it's going to be 3, 6, 9, and 14. So 3, 6, 9, and 14. 3, 6, 9, and 14. So I'm going to actually now I'm going to send these up. Control up. We're going to send these up again. It's going to be the same note. So all the A sharps are A sharps, all the C's are C's, but it's going to have a little bit of a different. There we go. So these notes sound higher even though they are the same note in the bass. We can even, for example, some of the other notes that are remaining, for example, here in the middle, I like this one in particular. So the 13th note in each bar, we're going to drive that up to about here. So is that a note in the chord? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to keep it there. All right, so that's kind of a bass sequence. It's pretty good. So we're going to listen to the whole thing in context. Okay. So now with the organ, what I'm going to do to make this sound a little bit less robotic is first randomize the individual notes of the chords. So I'm doing this by Tools, Randomize. I just use the keyboard shortcut, but you can do whatever. I'm going to reset all the values here, and I'm going to add a little bit of this. So make sure this is bipolar. You don't have to, but so this drives all the notes down, while this may drive some of them up and some of them down. But anyway, so this adjusts the individual velocity, the individual volume of all these notes, and that adds a little bit of kind of randomness, a little bit of maybe humanity into it. So we're going to accept that. And also the start of the notes, there's no good way of just randomizing the start of each note, but for chords, what I like to do is use the strum tool, which is going to do this. So like a kind of effect. Very, very subtle. So that's still not the most randomized you could get it, but it'll do. So now it sounds a little bit more organic. We're going to drive the volume down a little bit with the Rhodes. Some of the hat sounds. The bass is fine. Okay. So this is kind of like the basis of an idea. So what we're going to do is kind of develop that into a whole song. Well, maybe we're going to need a couple more instruments for that. So we're going to try maybe adding kind of a melody on top. So let's try another 3x oscillator. We're going to try kind of another. Let's try this kind of a square wave. So volume 0, volume 0. Wow, that's loud. Okay. We're going to drive that down. Okay. We're going to do some more volume magic with that, so okay, we're going to filter that down. Okay, maybe I want this to be a little bit higher in sound actually, so what if I put this volume halfway, make that a saw wave? Okay, make that 12. And a little bit of white noise, a little bit of random sound in there. Okay, not so much. Just add a little bit of dirtiness to the sound. Okay, well, fine. So, the same kind of like curve I did before. You know, something like that. Okay. So now, developing a melody, one good strategy is, at least for beginners, to use the notes in the chord as the basis of your melody. So the notes have to be in the scale, of course. If your song is not all in one scale, if maybe some of the chords don't fit in the scale, then you're going to have to fit the chords as well. But anyway, so this would be perhaps in something like a B flat minor. So let's try something out. Okay. I'm going to raise the volume on that. So I like the rhythmic pattern, so I'm going to copy that. Okay. So it seems like it fits. Maybe this. Then change this one. All right. So the rhythm was originally supposed to be here, but we put it in here, so a little bit of a change. Something else we can do with this sound, kind of add a pitch, kind of like a vibrato to it. So this is kind of a melody. All right, so the same way we did with the chords and the drums, now we're going to separate all the other instruments. So cut and paste here. I'm going to take this, cut, paste. So I think right about now would be a good time to start naming all the patterns. So first of all, the instruments. This would be the bass, and this would be kind of like the melody. The lead is the technical term for that. Rhodes is fine, we know that those are the chords, and all the drum elements have already been named, so we're going to leave them there. Now, this is the drum pattern, so right-click, rename, We can also just shift and click. So it's going to be drums. There's going to be the chords. There's going to be the bass. And there's going to be the melody. Okay, so now the names, you see that the patterns actually have the name in the playlist, so that's going to be useful. You can even give them a color if you want, kind of an individual. For example, if you think drums, if you see drums as red, or if you think red is a convenient color for that, you can give it red. So for chords, for example, let's say it's something like blue-ish. For bass, let's say something like a green. And for melody, something like yellow, perhaps. So now everything is color-coded as well. You can even give colors to the instruments themselves. Now, so we're going to start sending these channels to the mixer for later use. So we're going to do the same. So this was already assigned to 1, but let's reset that. So now the chords, I want them to be in the first channel. This is the way I personally organize my instruments, but you may do something differently. Let's say I want the lead to be second, the bass to be third, the kick, I want it to be fourth. I usually like the bass and the kick to be right next to each other visually, so 3 and 4. Snare, all the snare sounds in the same channel, so 5. Okay, hat sounds 6. Now, if we were to play the sequence, okay, well, actually, we need to add back in the bass and the melody there. Okay, so you see that the sound of the channels is being individually sent to the different channels in the mixer. Now we can even name and color them as before. This was the chords. Can we say chords? And the chords were yellow. The bass. No, it was the melody. So we're going to say melody, or well, lead. And the color was green. No, that's the bass. Okay, the chords were blue. The lead was yellow. Okay. Bass was green. So with the drums, we can use kind of like the same red color for all of them. This is going to be the kick, snare, hats. Okay. So I personally don't use colors that much. I usually just remember where everything is, but if you like the visual organization of the colors better, you can use that. So anyway, so we have kind of like these instruments. Now, what are we going to do with these instruments? We have to develop that into kind of a song. So we could think about how a song could start, maybe, so with the drum sequence, but maybe not all the sounds in the drums, maybe just we remove maybe the hat sounds. We're going to send them to their own channel. So we're going to insert one here. It's going to be the hats. Paste. There we go. So now we have the drums, or the kick and snare, separated from the hats. Throwing them in color. It's going to be kind of like red as well. Okay. Now with the hats, actually, we could give them another color. We could say, for example, okay, it's pink, looks good. So we're going to do that. So okay. So we're going to copy these two patterns. We're going to keep going. I like the idea of starting with the chords. We're going to leave that there. then adding the bass later on, and then the melody. So we're going to just develop all of that. So this is kind of, I guess, the blueprint. Let's start the bass a little bit earlier on, the melody earlier on. Okay, so this is kind of the beginning of the song. Okay, so okay, so that transition sounds a little bit too dry. So what can we do to make that a little bit better? So change this constant pattern. We can create a variation on the hats, perhaps, so they're not just the same thing over and over. We can add a sound in here to act as a transition, or something that kind of like, or another sound to just kind of like build up throughout. This is very common in, for example, electronic dance music. So we have what are called risers, so kind of like a sound constantly going up. You may add just kind of like a crash cymbal or something like that. So let's try that out now, in fact. Cymbals. I like that idea. I'm going to double click on that and drop the volume down. Usually when you put sounds directly into the playlist like that, they sound very, very loud for some reason. So we're going to keep that tight under wraps. So what I'm going to do is take one of these sounds and paste it reversed, so it's going to build up to the hit. So, okay, now I'm going to double click on that. There's an option here called reverse. Notice that now it's been reversed. Volume down, of course. We're going to zoom in there. We're going to move this one. Now, if it doesn't exactly fit, this one is not exactly, like it doesn't exactly fit, we're going to zoom all the way in, and it lets us control this. Or if you zoom out a little bit, like let's say, for example, it's there, we're going to do the same trick we did in the piano roll, and we're going to hold Alt, click, and it lets us move exactly where we want it. So we want it to be just a tight buildup. Okay, there we go. So let's listen to that now. Okay. I think maybe I want this, but in reverse. So I kind of like duplicated that. So hold Shift and drag, and it creates another copy of that. I want it to be reversed, like the normal way around, but if I click on reverse, you see that it reverses both. So what I'm going to do is make this one different from that one. So I'm going to click here on the top left of the title bar, make unique. So now I'm going to click on that one, reverse, and now we have it here. Okay. We're going to move it over here. There we go. This one I'm going to make it quieter, just so it mixes in with the other sound. Let's try that out. Okay, it's fine. I think I actually don't like the sound. I'm going to just remove that pure white. Remove it. Okay. Now, another thing you can do is, for example, you can take one of these patterns and make it shorter. That's going to remove those notes from the pattern. This is something I do a lot. Listen to this. So drums. I mean, we can actually make the drums a little bit less repetitive. We can expand the sequence. We're going to delete, first of all, the drums from here. Let's say, for example, so something like that. got these snares. All right, so that's a little bit better. Let's go here, and then what we're gonna do is kind of, let's say we keep that in there. Maybe we get the hats to start a little bit earlier than they should. So what we do is take this pattern, drag it from the left, maybe do that. So now it sounds like this. Okay, so maybe we just remove these two from here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. Okay, now maybe we want a longer crash sound to lead up to the other one. So what about this one? Quieter, reversed. We're gonna make that lead to that. Okay, I want to replace that sound. Okay, so kind of adding transitions in there a little bit. We can add changes in the middle. So the chords, maybe instead of being the same exact pattern every single time, we can do something. Maybe we can modify maybe the last one. Let's say this one. Okay, so it's going to do that every single time. If we want to keep the original version, for example, you can actually duplicate the pattern of the chords to clone chords number 2. So you can have, for example, chords number 2 over here. And the second variation is going to be the chords number 2. Chords number 1, we can go back to what it was originally. Maybe even make this. So there we go. And you can do the same with all the other instruments, perhaps. So Now, for example, bass, we can clone the bass. I'm going to say bass 2. This one, let's say something a little bit different. So we're going to use these 3 notes still, but maybe we do something like that. So let's listen to that. Just going to do it only on bass number 2, but not on the original bass. Okay. And with the drums, let's create another variation of the drums. So let's say clone. Let's say something like that. So their variation of that. Okay. So this is going to be drums 2. Only on, like, let's say drums 2, for example, only at the end of like this entire section. We can do the same with the melody. So that's a very typical thing we do with the melody, that we create a variation perhaps on it the second time it repeats, maybe even not just on the last section. So melody number 2. Maybe we make this long, this note extra long. So so that's kind of like the beginning of something. And this would be something like the beginning chorus, perhaps. Now, let's say we want a verse. We want to keep perhaps the drums, the hats, and the chords. Maybe the bass. It's going to be bass and bass number 2. Maybe we want something simpler for the verses, for the bass. So let's say we create a variation on the bass. Let's say bass clone. It's going to be bass number 3. We create a simpler pattern. Okay. So basically, these one here. Okay. Just kind of playing around with that. This one, G, okay, G sharp. This one's D sharp. Okay. So let's try that out. Let's say we don't want the hats so much, or maybe a simpler version of the hats. We're going to clone the hats. There's going to be hats number 2. For the verse, we're going to make them a little bit simpler. So maybe something like that. Maybe we want the simpler version of the hats at the beginning of the song as well, so we're going to leave it there. Let's go with the hats as well. And say this. Okay. So let's listen to what we have so far. so that's fine. So that's kind of like the beginning of the song. Then you think of how it would go from there. When you start mixing the instruments together, then another thing you can do is add effects. We haven't really had time to take a look into that, but let's see, for example, we add kind of a reverb to the whole thing. So what we're going to do is add one of the channels that is unused. We're going to call that a reverb send, because we're going to send all the channels to that one. We're going to move it to the left, so Alt plus left on the keyboard moves them without rearranging everything. Let's say, for example, the reverb is kind of like a light blue. I like the color. So it's going to be the reverb. What we're going to do is add a reverb instrument, for example, this one. So we're going to set the dry to 0, very important, because the sound of, for example, the hats or the snare or whatever it is already coming out of this channel. So we don't want it to be duplicated. So we set the dry to 0. Let's change some of the settings. Let's do something like that. For example, these are some settings I like, whatever you want. So it's going to be the reverb. We're going to send, for example, the hats to this one, so we can just click on that. It's going to add a routing to that reverb. Now, it's going to be too loud originally, so we want to drive that down, perhaps. So something perhaps like there. So it's near, so something perhaps like there. I usually don't add reverb to the kick and not a lot to the bass, so this is going to be very quiet. The lead, something like that. And maybe the chords is something like that. So let's listen to that. Okay, whoops, we kind of like overdid it with the chord. So it sounds like it's a little bit more spacious. So we're going to add, so these sounds also, we want them to be affected by the reverb. So we're going to send them to a free channel. This is going to be number 8. Remember that this is a different instance from this one, so we're going to send this to number 8 also, and this one as well. So all into number 8. This is going to be kind of like the effects channel, I guess. Let's say we assign kind of a whatever color to it. That's too similar to the hat, so we're going to change it to maybe something like that. Okay. Okay, so we send it to the reverb, we do something like that. Something I like to do with the kick, kind of as a mixing strategy, is to assign what is called kind of a sidechain compression, which means that every time the kick plays, the volume on whatever instruments you add a sidechain compression to, so whenever the kick hits, the volume is going to be lowered on the other instruments, but only when the kick is playing. So this gives a little bit of bounciness to the sound. It makes the kick sound bigger. It does a couple of things. So let's try that out as a final technique in this video. Now, kick, let's assign it to, let's say, for example, the hats. So we're gonna right click and the little arrow in here, sidechain to this track. There we go. Same thing with the effects. Same thing with the reverb. Same thing with the chords, the lead, and the bass. And we're going to add kind of a different amount of sidechain to all of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a Fruity limiter channel. This is the way I like doing it. There are other ways, but this is what I typically do. So something like that. Sidechain, make sure that it comes from the kick. So right click in here, kick. So you don't want it to be this big. You want it to be a little bit subtler. So we're going to adjust that to taste. so the whole thing sounds a little bit more cohesive. Now with this like super basic mixing techniques, everything's going to the same reverb, but you can also give everything or individual channels their own reverb or whatever effects you want, their own EQs when you start the mixing phase, whatever it is you want. And from here, it's just basically what you keep doing. So you got to think of at any time in the song, what are all the elements doing? Are they working together? So what can you do to give it a little variety? So for example, I made variations on the chords and the bass pattern and the drums. I used different versions of the hats for these two sections. I added like this little stop here. I made the hats start a little bit earlier here. I made these transition sounds. And this one is a little bit different because it doesn't have this sound here. So this one sounds like a bigger change from this one. So, like a whole bunch of different things that all add up together to make one song. So I think that's basically the process of creating a song, or at least my process. There are, again, many different ways of doing that. But, I guess it's just a way, just a matter of finding your own way and exploring your music creation process, like the way you like to create songs, where you start, how you go from there. It takes a lot of practice, but the process is very rewarding in the end. So I hope this was helpful to you, and